Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're exploring one of the most intriguing, relatable, and honestly, deeply necessary figures in all of human history, the Fool. In our modern lives, we're actually suffering profoundly from the absence of this archetype. So we're going to look at exactly why we desperately need to reclaim the psychology of the Fool, and not just as some quirky historical curiosity, but as an absolutely vital piece of our own psychological survival and wholeness.
I mean, really ask yourself, are you taking life way too seriously? Just be honest and reflect for a second on your own exhaustion. We live in this world that aggressively pushes efficiency, endless productivity, and straight-up workaholism. We take ourselves so incredibly seriously trying to fit these rigid standards that we often end up feeling like, well, mere cogs in this massive, frenetic machine. If you've been feeling bored, completely drained, or just lacking that spark of passion, it's very likely because you've lost touch with a pretty fundamental part of your humanity.
It's just like Shakespeare so perfectly put it. We are all merely players on a stage. And that quote really validates that deep, sinking feeling we get of lacking spontaneity and authenticity in our daily grind. We've somehow completely forgotten that playfulness isn't a luxury. It's an absolute basic human need. To fight back against this draining conformity, we literally need to invite the archetype of the fool back onto our stage. But what does that actually mean? Well, the word fool actually comes from the Latin foles, which literally means a pair of bellows expelling empty air. Now, if you apply that to a person, it totally implies someone empty-headed with insubstantial thoughts, right? But think about what bellows actually do. They provide the vital, rushing oxygen that you need for combustion. It's the exact same thing with fools. While they might seem empty-headed on the surface, they're actually the very catalyst that fires us up and breathes life into an otherwise totally sterile environment.
Which brings us to section 1, speaking truth to power, and the concept of the wise fool. When you look back at the role of the fool throughout history, you quickly realize the greatest fools were honestly no fools at all. Just look at Socrates. He's the ultimate archetypal wise fool. His entire educational method was built on exposing the folly of the supposedly wise, and he famously claimed that his own profound wisdom came entirely from knowing his own ignorance.
You see this dynamic institutionalized in the royal courts of the Middle Ages with the court jester. These jesters were often outcasts. They frequently had physical deformities that pushed them out of average society. But because of that, they were practically immune from punishment. They used their quick wits and a ventriloquist's bauble to safely deliver blunt, incredibly harsh truths that the king absolutely needed to hear. Believe it or not, people even thought keeping a fool around actually warded off the evil eye.
Moving on to section 2, fools, clowns, and tricksters. Now, what's really interesting here is that we tend to lump all comical or disruptive characters together in our heads. But to truly understand the pure archetype of the fool, we absolutely have to separate him from his darker shadows.
So on one side, we have the innocent fool. The fool is completely vulnerable. They break the ice by laughing with you or, honestly, even at themselves. This kind of courageous vulnerability strips away our social masks and invites genuine connection. But then, on the other hand, you have the trickster. The trickster is intentionally deceptive and operates entirely on schadenfreude, that joy in someone else's pain. They're out to entertain themselves at the expense of others, always setting traps and laughing at you, never with you. And then, sitting somewhere else entirely, we have the clown, who is trapped in the sad clown paradox. For the clown, comedy is really just a defense mechanism used to mask heavily suppressed feelings of rage or intense tragedy. The clown sacrifices their own mental well-being just to constantly entertain everyone else while wearing that exact same painted smile. And when that constant suppression finally takes its toll, the clown gets completely swallowed up by their dark shadow. This is exactly why, in modern pop culture, clowns have turned into a source of sheer horror. It's perfectly encapsulated by villains like the Joker.
All right, section 3, the fool in storytelling. When we dive into classic literature and myth, you'll see the fool isn't just there for comic relief. They are the absolute, totally necessary catalyst for any kind of profound journey or true healing. We see this beautifully laid out in the Arthurian myth of Parsifal. This story focuses on the Fisher King, who is suffering from this deep, agonizing wound. It makes him incapable of truly living, but he's also unable to die, leaving his entire kingdom completely barren. This perfectly mirrors that painful transition from naive consciousness to self-consciousness that every single one of us goes through. The prophecy said the king could only be healed when an innocent fool showed up and asked a simple question. It actually took Parsifal, a young, naive fool, 20 agonizing years to finally step up and ask the Fisher King, "Whom does the Grail serve?" And that single innocent question instantly healed the king and restored the entire land. There's another really fascinating dynamic in Cervantes' Don Quixote. Quixote's life-giving, completely foolish illusions, his quixotic idealism, drive him to literally tilt at windmills and live this grand epic life. This contrasts so sharply with his squire Sancho Panza's super grounded, puzzled realism. Almost everyone looks at Quixote as a complete and utter madman, but those illusions are exactly what keep his spirit alive. Tragically, by the end of the novel, his illusions are totally shattered. He wakes up to cold reality, realizes he's just crazy, and dies. He literally dies from an overdose of reality. Which actually brings us right to this incredibly cynical yet super common worldview. It's perfectly captured by Dostoevsky's character Ippolit in The Idiot. He makes the case that harsh truth is always better than living in a fool's paradise. And this really hits the nail on the head regarding that intense tension we all constantly feel, right? That tug of war between confronting a bitter, cold reality and maintaining a sense of foolish, optimistic hope.
But Dostoevsky directly contrasts that pure cynicism with his protagonist, Prince Mishkin, the so-called idiot of the story. Mishkin is utterly frank, completely open-hearted, and incredibly innocent. He flat-out refuses to hide behind a social mask in this highly corrupt, money-hungry society. And while everyone else is relentlessly mocking his lack of social experience, his pure foolishness serves as this profound moral anchor. It leads him to confidently declare that beauty will save the world. Okay, let's jump into Section 4, the psychology of zero. As we shift into the symbolic framework of the Fool, we really have to look at mystical traditions, specifically the tarot, because that's where the Fool's symbolism is just incredibly potent. In the major arcana of the tarot, the Fool is assigned the number 0. This circular form is huge symbolically. It represents infinity, the ancient Egyptian Ouroboros, and that primeval sense of wholeness from before consciousness even existed. 0 isn't just nothing, it's the pleroma. It's the absolute fullness of being where the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. It represents endless, absolutely boundless potential.
Because of that boundless potential, reading the tarot is often referred to as the Fool's journey. It maps perfectly onto the classic hero's monomyth. The Fool takes a massive leap off the cliff of the ordinary world, straight into unknown territory. He faces down his absolute greatest fears, his dragon, and ultimately returns with a treasure, a literal psychological rebirth to help heal his people. Every single hero's path, bar none, begins with a foolish, terrifying leap completely out of their comfort zone. Bringing us to our final section, Section 5, Embracing Your Inner Fool. So the crucial point we're getting at is this. How do we actually apply all of this ancient archetypal wisdom to our own daily lives? How do we actively embrace this inner fool for the sake of our own psychological health?
Well, it really starts with adopting what Zen Buddhists call shoshin, which translates to beginner's mind. Think about it. In the expert's mind, possibilities are very few. They're already closed off. But in the beginner's mind, the possibilities are vast. This is exactly why groundbreaking inventors and true geniuses are almost always viewed as total fools at the beginning of their careers. They deliberately cultivate an open-minded silence that allows them to discover entirely new paths that the so-called experts are completely blind to.
The great psychologist Carl Jung hit on this perfectly when he wrote, "The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom." Jung actually equated the fool with our unadapted inferior function. It's that despised, completely ridiculous part of our personality that we try to hide. Yet, ironically, this unadapted inner fool acts as the vital bridge to the unconscious. It literally holds the absolute secret key to unlocking total psychological wholeness.
When you actually let your inner fool take the lead, the practical benefits are just immense. First off, it overcomes that paralyzing anxiety of overthinking. You suddenly become willing to risk absolute failure in order to find unexpected, unimaginable success. But most importantly, your inner fool ignores that harsh, self-critical inner voice. You know the one, that voice of conformity constantly telling you to dumb down, play it safe, and strive for everyone else's acceptance, usually at the total expense of your true desires. We absolutely must admit the fool back into our inner court to bring us fresh ideas and vital energy. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly vital question. What cliff do you need to joyfully jump off of today? We honestly suffer so much more in our imagination than we ever do in reality, trapped by our endless fears of looking foolish.
It is time to stop suffering in that sterile wasteland. Invite your inner fool back into your life. Embrace that beginner's mind and take that first beautiful, utterly foolish step into the unknown.